The Watchtowers has been a focal point of creativity for a long time.
I knew who I was. I knew that I was an artist.
They were working out of a sheer need to communicate something based on what they had to work with.
Because that's what we fought for, the ability to be free to say what we wanted to say.
You've got to use your art as a tool to bring about social change.
We have fine art in Watts, and it's been going on 61 years because of the Watchtowers Art Center campus.
This program was made possible in part by a grant from Anne Ray Foundation, a Margaret A. Cargill philanthropy, the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, an award from the National Endowment for the Arts on the web at arts.gov, a grant from Grow at Annenberg, and the California Arts Council.
The Watchtowers has been a focal point of creativity for a long time. It's an icon to be acknowledged, but that creativity is ongoing. It's a community of humans that have a creative nature.
As kids, we played on those towers, Runaway by Mr. Rodea himself.
Simon Rodilla, tile setter by trade, Italian-born, American for half a century, builder of defiant towers.
They call him an outsider, of all things, because he didn't conform to any of the known understandings of what artists do.
Once Simon Rodilla finished the Watchtowers and he left, the Art Center was created and it became like a hub really for Black artists and the Black vanguard in Los Angeles. A space for Black artists to exhibit in a time where those opportunities weren't allowed.
People coalesce around the towers and then the Watts Art Center as a space because of Rodilla's idea of building something from essentially nothing. So he, builds the towers literally from scraps and shards of pottery and porcelain and metal that he's found. And that's sort of reminiscent of what the Black community is, an amalgamation of all these different people from all these different places, even inside Los Angeles, sort of coalescing and coming together to build something really strong and enduring.
In Watts, there's a large degree of cultural capital that goes unrecognized and underappreciated. And I think that this center provides an opportunity for those things to be showcased. In so many instances, centers like the Watchtowers Art Center have grown to become these creative hubs in their community that actually have a very calming effect on their surrounding areas.
We have fine art in Watts, and it's been going on 61 years because of the Watchtowers Art Center campus.
It's a funny story. I mean, it's a pretty funny. I think I told you. Yeah. The city thinks Watchtowers is an eyesore, and they want to tear it down. The city comes and cannot because of the way it's built, right? So it's like totally the opposite of what they think. A group forms, the Committee to Save the Watchtowers, takes over a little house next to the towers and wants to start an art school.
They were looking for somebody with an art degree and some experience with social service. which was me. I was unemployed at the time, and I said, well, that sounded like me. And I split for Watts.
So you get people coming out of the South who bring those experiences, have been in the military, know what a segregated army feels like, try and find their ways, particularly on GI Bills, etc., and they're working for an opportunity to express themselves, because that's what we fought for, the ability to be free to say what we wanted to say, to have ideas, and to participate in the American dream.
Noah was born in Snow Hill, Alabama, 1917. And if you were to remove art from Noah's history, his story would be just as fantastic and amazing. Born at the height of Jim Crow, goes to college, becomes a high school teacher. Then the Second World War begins. He joins the armed services as a CB, using his knowledge of construction because he taught industrial arts in high school. After the war, he goes back to school and gets a master's of social work, and then makes his way out to California.
I left Ohio and came to California because I'd been in the military service in California, and I dreamed of returning because it was very pleasant.
He's in California as a social worker, and one day gets up from his desk, walks out the door, and goes and enrolls in Chouinard Art School, which later becomes CalArts.
Decided to clear books out. I think I want to go to art school. I was considered the first full-time black student. I had a studio clean enough to eat off the table. I had a beret, and I ate cheese and drank wine. But I wasn't an artist yet until Watts. That made me an artist.
Noah was definitely intellectual. He had the background in social work. He has the arts training. He has the military training. And I guess when they wanted him to begin the center, it is the confluence of a lot of things about Noah and how he wanted to interact with his community.
There was another person in the community whose name was Sue Welch. And Sue Welch and I began to explore the community in terms of designing an art program. We worked for weeks on end trying to recruit youth to come to the towers to experience the programs that we were going to design. I also ran across Justin Powell. So Justin Powell, Sue, and myself became a team to create a program in Watts. I would say that it was definitely a group effort that made that little school possible.
The initial idea for the center was to create an art school, and that, I guess, didn't sit well with Noah because I believe in his mind, he wanted to provide this opportunity for the people in the community to express themselves in ways they hadn't done before. And through that activity to, kind of get to know each other and then, talk about larger issues.
Art is the most uncontaminated discipline existing in the world. There was an excellent opportunity to integrate it with even poverty.
As you have the opportunity to try to live the American dream and allegedly move up, no matter what your racial background, the housing becomes available to the next group that's trying to move. The difference is, for African Americans, as we desegregated, what got left behind were the poorest amongst us, those least able to move. And what that does is it starts to leave areas like Watts and Compton, et cetera, abandoned, not just because the industries have started to move away, but because there was no desire, no interest to put resources into the Black community. So all Black people all around the country were feeling the anxiety of things need to be different.
As a rule, Black kids, particularly poor black kids, have a low self-esteem, a low self-image. And the object here was to raise their self-image. If they could come to the towers and have a good experience, a positive experience, they could take this experience with them wherever they go. Improve their self-image, and this would make a great deal of difference in terms of their ability and capacity to grasp whatever their objectives were, whether it was in school or out of school. Oftentimes we take the children on trips to pick up objects, junk and whatnot, and bring it back to the towers, to the art center to do assemblages and collages and so forth. In large cities, junk is not often disposed of at garbage dumps. Wherever there are poor people, there's piles of junk. People bring the junk there. In Watts, it was extremely accessible. Mounds of scrap metal all over the place.
About 60% of the people in Watts are out of work, doesn't have jobs, living on welfare of some sorts. And all these things are building up. People might have a TV, they can see the nice things in other parts of the city, and they know what's going on in the world. They see millions and billions of dollars spent on rockets and the first one thing and another, sent overseas to other countries. And here in their own country, you know, they're hungry, they're out of job. They just beat, you know, they're letting off steam.
You really have to begin in 1965. That was the year of the revolt. It caused a revolution in the thinking, not only of blacks who lived in Watts and throughout Los Angeles, but the entire country. As a middle to low income community, public services that had long been denied gave rise to the reaction to a police brutality incident, which was the order of the day in the mid-60s. It was nothing to learn that a friend, for example, one of my best friends, had been beaten near death by the policeman for jaywalking. Marquis incident on 116th and Avalon was set off in that atmosphere of rising expectations. And the feeling was among my generation is that we're not going to take it anymore. And so if we can't be a part of the system, then we will attack the system.
My impression was that it was the most devastating event. Had there been just looting, that would have been one thing. But there was not only looting, there were fires, smoke that permeated the whole community. And those were the sights that we saw from our back door. We saw police in the place, firemen trying to put out the fires unsuccessfully. We saw crowds and crowds of people running to and fro. The view from the towers was clear and unobstructed. We could see clearly what was happening on 107th Street.
The explosion within our inner cities, not only in Los Angeles, but in other major cities across the country. The whole poetry of the era where everything was still rising, that this was not a war to end wars, it was a shout out, it was a beginning, it was a breaking out.
It changed so many lives because you looked up and all of a sudden the neighborhood was on fire. Not that they hadn't seen it being destroyed anyway, but now it's really on fire, and what's left are charred remains.
After the riots, Noah and Judson Powell go out and begin collecting material. I guess there was this need to kind of reassess what had happened through the material culture of the riots.
We had collected 3 tons of debris after the riot, and we fashioned it in some kind of a sculpture and whatnot. There's something about objects that appeal to me is that it stimulates my imagination. I can think to do something with it, turn it into something else other than what it was really designed for.
And probably the most significant piece that Noah made, in my opinion, is the Watts Riot piece that he made out of the charred remains of the buildings that had burned. And you see him glue burnt wood and paint on top of it. It was his way of taking those charred remains and making an abstract work out of it at a time when abstract art is also starting to take hold a little bit more in the country.
In most instances, these artists were working without reference to any Western canons of art. They were working out of a sheer need to communicate something based on what they had to work with. To a large degree, I think they were doing it even before some of the artists that we've come to know as doing assemblage. I think they were pioneers.
So we invited some other artists to come in and cart away some of the junk and make something for the Earth Festival, which was at Markham High School.
And with another group of artists, they put together the 66 Signs of Neon.
The exhibit got its title from the drippings of neon signs up on the ground, mixing with the sand and dirt. So what Justin and I did was just simply take the shapes out of the sand and brush them off and mount them on something and sold them. And they went like hotcakes.
For 3 years, the show traveled to 9 venues, both nationally and internationally. It was extremely successful. It reached a really wide audience. People found it really moving. The rebellion itself was a call for change, and the artists that work with the literal materials that they collected afterwards were showing how we could create change and uplifting people.
And we sold our stuff, and we send the money back, and we make some more stuff. So we always had 66 pieces to display, but they were different pieces from time to time because we made sales, and that's how we existed. But from Washington, D.C., the exhibit traveled. And about 1969, it came back in a truck, just about in the same shape it was when we found it in Watts, in the smoldering embers of the Watts Riot. In other words, that was the end of Signs of Neon. It was back in its original state, junk.
I think that the 66 Signs of Neon was really important because it began to show larger communities what kind of visual language was being made by people in Southern California. And so after the rebellion, LA artists really start to have these conversations about those ideas and what their role is in those things.
Artists in Los Angeles weren't working as a formal collective, but they were affecting each other's practices still, and they came to a sort of shared aesthetic of assemblage. Many of them were working with found materials. Betty Saar, with works like The Liberation of Aunt Jemima, one of her most famous assemblage works.
It was my personal way of reacting in anger to what was happening to blacks and what had happened to blacks.
The anger that she might show in some of the work becomes pity, you know, and hurt.
But when the riots happen, it's also at a time when America and Black America are looking for references, for tools, for items that might depict their experience. and giving them a secondary life, a secondary meaning.
Artists are starting to use the material from the streets, but they're also starting to see how important the language that they're using in their work in terms of both assemblage, but also, you know, metal work that comes out. And there's so much to be said. There are so many stories to tell. And the language that they're giving to the community and then broadcasting out into larger communities. It was really a pivotal moment that I think, you know, a lot of people, particularly lots of larger institutions, didn't necessarily pick up on, but you know, it didn't matter. That wasn't the goal. That wasn't the audience. The audience was the communities that these artists lived in and supplying them with language that would support them, sustain them, and give them opportunities to grow.
Sometimes I look at, you know, institutions, some institutions, as positioning themselves as gatekeepers. And whenever I see a gatekeeper, I usually try to jump over the fence. And I think that's what they did a lot. I mean, there's a story of Charles White, you know, driving up to LACMA one day trying to get a curator to take a look at his work and actually having to pull the curator out, take him to the trunk of his car and show him his drawings.
Depictions of African Americans in positive light was important to the movement. So Charles White is making work that is depicting strong, proud Black people. Even if he does a moment in their suffering, most of his work is showing us with our head lifted high.
I think Charles White was a seminal figure in actually defining the African American aesthetic in the 60s, 70s, and beyond. There were so many artists who I think he inspired through his depiction. I mean, you have to understand, we were hit over the head with the idea Black was beautiful. And we kept looking for images that said that. And that's what Charles White's work did for us. And I think that a lot of other artists picked up on that and emulated that work and emulated his style in many regards. I know I did.
When I use this image, I'm not addressing myself solely to the Black people. Hopefully that I'm creating an image that cries for justice for all oppressed people.
Young, gifted, and black. Black. Black is beautiful because it feels so good.
I think every generation looks for a new way to express themselves. As the civil rights movement takes hold in the 60s and 70s and the Black Power movement, when we start to refer to ourselves as Black, you can keep pushing the envelope. And you can keep talking about that march to emancipation and et cetera. So it's an evolution as to how far you can go in what it is that you have to say.
The art in that particular era grew out of that. If you can imagine that we were hungry for expressions of those long-held, deep-seated feelings of, on the one hand, frustration, on the other hand, hope. And the art reflects that, a kind of empowerment. The art became confrontational. It was accusatory. It was saying, here I am, I'm Black, and if you don't like it, too bad, but this is the way I feel.
The period really represents a kind of renaissance. Might not even be a renaissance, you know. Renaissance is a rebirth. This could have been like a first birth, you know, a real first opportunity for minority artists to showcase their work.
There's just sort of a somewhat collective ethos in the air. People are really creating the spaces that they need to be showing their work.
The Watts Towers, the Creative Arts Academy, the Watts Writers Workshop, HOSLA, Performing Arts Society of Los Angeles. So because there was a cultural consciousness, we were involved in total community. And we talked about opportunities and thought, we should open a gallery
Alonzo Davis and his brother Del Davis started their gallery, and their gallery became the cornerstone of a place to show. It was where the LA Times would come down and actually give a critique of the show.
That was the beginning of an opportunity that changed our lives and a lot of other people's lives.
I think that post-Watts Rebellion in Los Angeles gave a lot of artists material to use in their art making. But it also started to define for artists who weren't part of that group the power of what their art making was. And there were, at Brockman Gallery in 1967, when it began, these Saturday forums where they would come and debate what their responsibilities were as artists and as makers and as community members. They used to get into huge fights with each other about what their roles were, what their responsibilities were, what Black art was, if there was even such a thing. The power lies with these makers in particular, and the ways that they could translate what Artie was and take, again, like the Towers, take parts of lots of things and make them into something completely new and their own.
I'm Claude Booker. I'm president of the Black Arts Council and director of this installation. As Black people start to decide what their fate and destiny will be, as we are not allowed in museums, as we start to develop our own critics and aesthetics, I think that we're going to find that art won't be so precious with Black people as it is in the mainstream. I believe that we'll return to functional art. I just passed by a truck on the way to Will Rogers down on Century that was selling watermelons and paintings.
Simon Rodia's house burned down in a fire. Nobody knows quite how it started. The only thing left was the foundation. Curtis Tan started conducting art classes on the foundation of the house. They put a tarp over the remains to more or less shield everything. And then artists would kind of volunteer, they'd kind of drop in and help teach classes there. There was nothing very formal about it at all.
Curtis Tan, he was very sensitive to the creative spirits of other artists. He was a good mentor in relationship to how artists should be treated and how artists should conduct themselves in that kind of position.
He came from Caramel House. I think calling ourselves community artists harks back to the beginning of art in Cleveland at the Caramel House, where they were practicing community art for years. Community art has a certain belief system. It doesn't believe in art for art's sake. So you can imagine the problem that one would have in an elite community like Los Angeles with this kind of belief system. And yet we were consistent with our idea.
Noah and Curtis thought it would be a good idea to have a permanent structure there. And they had a lot of people working with the original Simon Rodia's committee. And the center was always supposed to be a temporary structure. It's been temporary now for how many years? It's on it's not even on a foundation, it's on a concrete slab, okay? There's a link between Noah Purifoy, Judson Powell, Curtis Tan, and John Otterbridge.
John Otterbridge came out here and became fascinated, not only with Los Angeles and all that was possible with it, but he found friends and he made allies. And together, he cared about offering what other people weren't giving to us. So, let's have a communicative arts academy. And if you have the Watts Tower Art Center, if you have Otterbridge starting the Communicative Arts Academy where they had dance and music, this is a neighborhood activity. Nobody was trying to come in and bring this stuff for them. And it was from the ground up, and they made it happen.
In Los Angeles, as I was introduced to this city, about art, the tool for change. We started to have conversations about the street environment being the studio environment. And I really believed that, or the studio being anywhere that you chose for it to be. Noah and Judson Powell talked to me a lot about that. And it formed an attitude that I just embraced within myself.
At the time, I recall, we didn't verbalize much about art. We insisted that art speaks for itself. But my attitude toward that concept was that it was elite and that poor people could not afford to feel that something was in and of itself because of basic needs and dependency. It's an elitist concept to feel that art is in and of itself art. It is not in and of itself because it interrelates with the world at large. So we began to think about having an art exhibition. It was at the Markham High School. It's a stone's throw from the Watchtower Art Center, where we had our first art festival.
Doing the Watts Summer Festivals, those were very exciting. Noah Purifoy had a lot to do with bringing those early exhibits together.
Pick people like Arthur Bridge and Alonzo Davis and Dale, his brother, to do the judging and whatnot. People that the community respected. Also, we would stimulate the artists to do work expressive for the festival. Not only did we do that, we went around to all of the schools and collected works by the students.
Over in this section, we have a series of pieces, most of which were done by students at the Watchtower Art Center. They have a year-long program along with a summer program. And many of the students have great potential if their skills and expertise are developed. Over here, we have 3 examples of pop art. The gum, the package of Cools, and Crest toothpaste. The shape canvas over here was also done by one of the students at the Watchtower Art Center.
And so through the understanding of Noah and Judson and Cecil Ferguson, they put together this wonderful group of people exposing professionals and non-professionals to each other. And it was so powerful.
You know, it's amazing, and now that I think back, prior to 1966, and I worked in a major institution, which is Los Angeles County Art Museum, I knew of 2 black artists. I mean, people who were black that painted.
Is that right?
And the first year at the festival, upon reaching the festival grounds, I saw all these canvases and sculpture and assemblages and collages and all these statements, you know. And I was completely in awe because I didn't even know black people painted.
So we got to stimulate quite a number of people in the community, thus making us really community artists. We weren't artists who closed themselves up in the studio. We were really out on the streets, mingling with the people.
Noah's background had a great deal to do with the use of art as a tool to bring about social change. When I first started to feel comfortable with using art as a tool, the language that I started to hear from people like Purifoy and Judson, we knew that these changes were very necessary, and we knew that we had to be participants in this arena.
John Otterbridge at the time had been at the Communicative Arts Academy in Compton.
My association with the Academy in Compton had brought me and others on staff in contact with organizations, individuals in the greater arts community of Los Angeles. We started to challenge the institutions together, and that was very healthy. In 1973 and 74, we started to run into financial problems, as we always had financial problems at the Academy. Things that we did to survive, people would not believe.
Politic people loved John because he could talk that talk. So those politics led John to the Watts Towers when they were looking for a director.
My plans in 1974, early 1975, was simply to get back in the studio, not separate myself from the movement totally, but to meditate a little bit more on who I was as a person. I knew who I was. I knew that I was an artist, but I thought that when Guy Miller in Watts told me back in the 60s that, said, Outerbridge, you've got to use your art as a tool. You've got to come out here and help pull some of this stuff together. He said, I'm not carving heads anymore, man. I'm carving minds and hearts, and we're trying to build.
The center and the towers were turned over to the city for management because they realized that they couldn't run it. It was just too much of a nut to crack.
Noah Purifoy recommended that Outerbridge be appointed the director.
And he was the director there for 18 years. I think Noah was there for the transition, and then he just kind of went out to the desert and did his thing.
I had a small budget, very small budget, for the Art Center, and a budget that was supposed to stimulate and design some semblance of programming. But I was also requested by the mayor at that time to assume as much responsibility as I could in developing focus and programming for the Cultural Heritage Monument in terms of tourism.
We want to establish a community art center that would be reflective of the genius of the community. John helped to get the Jazz Festival. He brought in artists, and he was always building and building. And John was just with that creative spirit. But the Watts Towers, through the festivals and what have you, he turned into a very, very special thing. And eventually, people wanted to control it. And so I think that, coupled with the fact that John wanted to move on into his private work, was why he eventually cut it loose.
All of us should be so extraordinarily grateful, not only that he did it, but that he was willing to buck the system about what he had to do as a career. He was such a giving human being in the development of his art.
After so many years, John became kind of dismayed because he was really, he says, I'm an artist, man, you know, and I want to do my art. So, and I always felt that he was doing his art.
John's an exceptional person. He's just this size short of sainthood on a lot of levels, okay? He's a philosopher poet. He's an incredible artist who in many ways kind of imbues the spirit of Simon Rodia in much the same way that Noah Purifoy did.
Noah Purifoy used to say all the time to me early on that it's a tool. It's a tool for you. And if it is a tool for you, it can be a tool for many others. And I started to really believe that, you know.
Purifoy, Outerbridge, and many of these artists, they were invested in younger generations, like Charles Dixon, like Mark Stephen Greenfield, who would go to become one of the directors of the Watts Towers Art Center.
John was not generous with his advice, okay? I mean, John had he had some tough days too. You know, he basically said, you will find your own way, grasshopper, that type of thing. I wish that he had given me a little bit more warning, you know, or given me a little bit more advice. I became the director of the Watts Towers Art Center in 1993. It was right after the 1992 uprising, so there was still a lot of tension. Oftentimes I compare the city to a series of tectonic plates. that are all butted up against each other. In some instances, the freeways create those divides. And there's so much tension that builds up between these communities, and at some point it snaps. And then everything that people had an argument with comes to the fore, and they take action on it.
You've seen Mr. King roll over on his back now, is that correct?
Yes, I have.
All right. Did you consider that to be an aggressive movement?
The fact that he rolled,
Yes.
it could be.
When officers pushed the crowd back, the demonstrators overturned.
I've been here since 1941. I saw the Watts riot. This is the second time in 25 years I saw what happened this time. They would automatically find them not guilty.
If it was a white individual getting beat by 4 black police officers, they would have got tried and they would have been found guilty.
And with the Koreans throughout all the communities, they didn't hire any black, they're taking everything away. There's no sense in burning a place down. You gotta look at all, this will never come back again. We gonna be back in primitive days here, going back. We going backwards instead of forward.
I don't believe it will myself. But how are you gonna get justice?
The collaboration show was not too long after the uprising, and it involved, I think altogether, like 22 artists, 11 Korean American artists, and 11 African American artists. I think in the African American community, they were looking at how, in so many instances, Korean Americans owned businesses in their neighborhoods. They didn't have any participation in it. There weren't any jobs for them in it. And so each of us was paired with another artist. And the idea was that we would create a piece of art jointly. And so I was paired with an artist named Kyung-ho Shin-ko. And we created a piece based on the guys that sell oranges by the freeway, because it was something that was common to both of us. When we get off at this off-ramp, there'd always be the same guy there selling oranges. And so I think, through collaborations, what we were trying to do is draw those parallels, draw those synergies that we had between our different communities, so that the artists could get to learn each other's modes of operation, stuff like that. And we think it was largely successful because it did create a lot more dialogue. But I started to really start gravitating towards more situations like that.
Mark Stephen Greenfield is a lot like John Outerbridge in his versatility as an artist. And I think that sort of translates to his role in the community as well. So he had these elders that he came after at Watts, but then he begins to sort of morph and shift and expand the community in ways that made it more accessible to people.
One year I brought in 5 Tibetan Buddhist monks to do a project with the kids in the neighborhood. They do those big sand mandalas. At first I got a lot of criticism from some people in the community that swore that I was trying to turn their children into Buddhists, which was never even a consideration. But then once they saw the end result, a lot of them warmed up to it, and they started to understand that it really was about the art. One of the other challenges really is getting people in the community used to the idea of contemporary art. I had some successes and I had some failures. So Alex Donis had been a teacher at the center. And whenever any of the instructors at the center asked me if they could do an exhibition, I said, sure, no problem. Alex had shown me some sketches of what he was going to do for this show. And they were paintings of police officers dancing with gang members. Come time to put up the show, and he's got these life-size paintings of police officers dancing with gang, huge. And some of the gang members came into the center and they saw it and they just loved it. They said, wow, look at that, I know him. And some of them actually recognized the police officers and sheriff officers that were in the paintings. Some LAPD officers came by, they saw that, they loved it. They were calling their friends in other divisions, you gotta come down and see this. So for about the first 5 days that the show was open, I said, oh, this is gonna be good. Well, there were a group of elderly women that came to the show, and they said, you're gonna take that show down. And I tried to explain to them, I said, if you make me take the show down, you're gonna give it the attention you don't want it to have. And they say, we don't care. We struck the show after about a week. We had a press conference. I basically took the blame for it. We tried to reach an accommodation with the artists, said, listen, let's take the show down now. Let's create a dialogue between you and the community to talk about the issues that the show brings up. Because the level of animosity towards the work, and the center grew to a point that was unsustainable. I had people that were calling me from Santa Monica and from the West Side saying, you should call the police down there. They should protect that show. And I said, don't you realize that what you want to do is minimize confrontations between the police and the community in this community? Because that's how things get out of hand. That's how riots get started, you know? So it's just people in other parts of the town just didn't have a clear understanding of what that community was about, you know?
One of the things that makes Mark such a remarkable person is that he is a combination of administrator and artist. Those are very different functions. And to be able to, he did as John Alderbridge did. He was able to do two very different things. So Mark did that, I think, very well. And at the same time, he continued to produce utterly magnificent visual artwork. Mark and I have talked about what is important in this life is that we do the work. We do the work. There are still African-American artists and increasingly Latino artists who still need to have a home like the Watts Towers Art Center. It must continue. If anything, there's an even greater need for the Watts Towers Art Center than ever before.
From my experience growing up here in this community, this space here was my first introduction to art. LACMA was on the other side of the world for me at that time. I didn't have to go all the way over there to see art or to meet artists or to take an art class. It was here in my community. And so for me, like a lot of other youth, it was a vital space, but it was a space also that brightened your world. You knew that there was, you know, something else out there than just this.
I could sum it up in one word, one concept: enlightenment. A broadening of your experience, a challenge to your being, you know? The more you see, the more you experience, the better person you are because you're just that much more well-rounded. You know, you come out of your own little personal enclave and, you know, it's needed.
But I think Noah set the tone. That's why the gallery is named for Noah Purifoy.
Noah contributed a huge foundation here in establishing the criteria for this place, so that he set the bar really, really high. And since then, you know, the other Art Center directors have carried on that level of professionalism. I'm the first woman who's been the director here at the center. I had to step in some really, really big shoes because much is expected of us.
This is the bridge housing for homeless people that the council and HACLA and the Salvation Army, and they've asked us to create a mural for it. And that's what this session is. It's a team approach. We have different artists and different mediums. So we're trying to come to a general agreement on what we're doing here.
I think the top is working fine. I think it just needs to be hooked in with some more housing over there. That space, Rosie runs that like a college institution. This is an educational environment, and we have standards. And so the people, the community are the major focal point for the reason why it should be there.
Color, I do see some issues practically. If you set the base as a blue, or if it's a gradient and you have an issue and a mistake with with a foreground.
She's just a powerhouse, right? I think she's the glue that holds it all together. I mean, it's tough to have all these different artists work in one place, and they all have their own ideas about things, their own egos. And she just has a real magical way of working with everybody.
You think the wings are too far?
No, they're okay there, but I think they work better with the wording. But the flowers don't bother me too much.
I'm very fortunate to work under Director Rosie Lee Hooks. I think in the community art world, I think she's a giant. She really understands the importance and the role community has and the conversation that it has with art and its artists, and knowing that education is a big part of that. Unfortunately, a lot of schools still don't have that, and arts education, and a lot of them are still struggling with that, trying to bring it back. But here we kind of fill a void with that.
The Watts Towers Art Center provides an alternative. A lot of these art centers, a lot of them were started because there was a certain need there. There's an absence of art programs in a lot of schools now. And what happens is if you don't have that type of creative environment, then you're kind of shortchanging the education those kids can get. Because it's been proven how the arts can impact your ability to absorb in other areas.
Art really, gives you that abstract way of thinking. It's more than just technique, it's about how you relate to your world. Because you can't make art if you don't say anything. You can draw something pretty nice, but if you're not touching your world, then how are you changing it?
I've been at the Art Center since I was about maybe 10 or 9 years old. And I was introduced to the place and never left, still there. It's like a refuge, they're like a little artist refuge, which is cool. The approach of the center hasn't changed from what I can see. I also haven't been there 50 years, but when I was there, it was just about getting kids who are interested in doing something after school and having a place for them, resources for them to do that. That hasn't changed. I think that smaller things change. I think that as a community becomes more Spanish speaking, we've had to adapt to that. Then when I hear stories about the way it was back in the day, it feels like it was the same then too. If you have a strong constitution, a strong foundation, there's no real need to change it.
Los Angeles is one of the only municipalities that actually has community art centers produced by a government entity. Our community, the last thing on the list is an art class or a dance class or a music class. That's just not affordable. So the space is very, very vital to the survival of our community. It gives our children a way out.
Every neighborhood deserves to have that range of activity. And in neighborhoods of color, not only do they have to build it for themselves, but when everyone who lived there before moves away, they took all their resources with them.
There are places that I wish were still around, I really do. And these were all within the community. You look back, you look now, and what survived really is the Watts Towers.
The rebellion was a pivotal point in the civil rights struggle. Everything up till that time had been pretty much a non-violent kind of issue. I don't see the rebellion of 1965 being separate and apart from the struggle, but this one was different from the rest because it took a physical kind of position and reacted to circumstances that had been rather unkind and unspoken and very much prevalent in the lives of many Black Americans, not just in Watts, but across the country. So the community became symbolic and calloused because of that event. And when you meet visitors coming to South Central Los Angeles, and they always come to Watts, wanting to know, is this the place that was besieged by war in 1960? Where is Charcoal Alley? Was the towers close to the burn-ins? But the history before that time, the history of blacks in America, whether we're speaking of California, some region in the Midwest or East, is not readily available from an academic classroom standard.
I see it as what's right there in front of you. And when you think about these places, particularly in poor neighborhoods where you don't have parks, they're making something out of nothing. It's just the normal thing to do. We're gonna make a baseball field out of an empty lot, and we're gonna make bases out of a piece of wood. Meanwhile, folks all around it say, hey, let's teach art. It's a real opportunity for expression and an outlet. We can bust people into the towers till we're blue in the face, but we still have to make sure that the centers in neighborhoods exist, because out of that you get not only excitement, but the next person who comes along and the next creative spirit and ideas that come that are reflective of not only who the people are, but it tells a history in the story. So you can't always just bring it in. You've got to help feed so that it can grow from where it is.
This program was made possible in part by a grant from Anne Ray Foundation, a Margaret A. Cargill philanthropy, the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, the Los Angeles County Department of Arts and Culture, an award from the National Endowment for the Arts on the web at arts.gov, a grant from Grow at Annenberg, and the California Arts Council.